Hey girls, I have one more topic that I wanted to talk about, and this is something that has been uh, one of the most difficult parts for me, and it is how to have a difficult conversation as a leader. And it's so awkward sometimes to have a conversation with somebody that is either in leadership over you or somebody that's just a really difficult personality. And so I just wanted to go in on a few things I'm learning about and things I've learned about. Um, Having hard conversations as a team leader and with your team members and even with people around you. I have had the opportunity to sit in the chair of a associate pastor and somebody on the team for 16 years, and it's only been the last 7 years that I've been sitting in the chair of leadership as a lead pastor. And it really changes the game because people no longer come to us to tell us everything that they're hearing or going through. And I found that it is really a lot more difficult for people to come all the way to the top about things. And although I'm not usually an intimidating person, I think sometimes just by the nature of having the lead chair, both my husband and I it can be difficult to have conversations. And so we want to really make sure in the culture of City Life Church and maybe of your leadership team as well, that we are making room for conversations that are hard and understanding that it's not going to ruin our friendship, not going to ruin our leadership ability it's actually going to strengthen our leadership ability to have hard conversations, to go in on things. So real quickly, I just want to go over a few notes that I found. And for me, I'm always looking for ways to expand my understanding of things. And so here's a couple of things we need to really grow together grow together in ways to have these hard conversations. So how do we do this? The most important thing, I think, for us is to understand that we will all have difficult conversations at one point or another, whether it's telling somebody on your team that they aren't measuring up, or maybe disciplining poor performance, or even going in and helping somebody move from your team to a different one. Having difficult conversations is never ever easy, but there's always ways to make these conversations both productive and as painless as possible. And so I'm looking at some notes here that I put together, and I'm just going to share them with you. The first thing is to be direct. That's really hard for me, but I hope it's something that you found that you can do a little bit more easy. Be honest and thorough with your feedback and fully clarify why you're having the conversation. This is a lot easier said than done, totally a lot easier said than done. But we want to make sure that as we give feedback, that these techniques don't just mask the point of our conversation, so that the thing we're going in is lessened, like the impact is lessened. So we need to be really careful that we're not being too harsh and driving right into being a critic, but we're actually doing the other person a favor by being honest and going to the person you're talking to knows that there's a critique coming, but rather than dancing around the subject, we're actually getting to the situation. So much easier to I am the type of personality that I need you to give me a love sandwich. I need you to kind of give me an accolade, tell me what's going on, and then kind of follow it back up with how much you care about me. Not everybody is that way. You can still be direct and be loving at the same time. And so I think most people on some level need the praise when you're getting ready to go into a direct conversation. It's really important to maybe even sometimes bring up a situation that you failed in, or something that you've had a hard time with. And so along with being direct, the next thing we need to do is be really specific. We need to be honest and thorough with our feedback. And just understand that if we can be really specific, the more clarity you provide, the better the critic and the critique will be received. So here's a couple of ways to do that. We can plan out the conversation. It's not a conversation that you want to have in the spur of a moment. If you're ready to have a hard conversation, you want to think through what you're going to say, as well as anticipate with how the other person might react. Really be mindful about the other person. Think through questions that they might ask and have answers prepared. Take a little time to pray about it. The more prepared you are, the easier it will be to stay even-tempered and not get flustered, and you'll be able to give a more solid critique of the situation. And really being careful that we wait before we jump right into a conversation. Like, plan out the take time, plan it out, think through it. Watch your language. The actual words we use during the conversation, they matter. Now, this stuff that I'm bringing to you is not stuff that is actually even my notes. They're notes that I've found from other people, and it's so important for us to learn from other people. And so even watching our language, we can change even the way we talk sometimes. With the counselor that my husband and I have right now, she's really teaching us how to say the same thing but say it differently. So the conversation and the words that we actually use, they really matter. We can outline what the situation is and the reason that we're having the conversation, but don't stop there. We also want to talk about the outcome we'd like to see. If you're disciplining somebody for poor team performance, explain to them and also talk to them about what it would look like when things are strong and what it's really going to look like if there's a positive outcome. And it gives the people around us something to look forward to and something to work towards, and help them understand kind of why we're having this hard conversation. So I think it's important for all of us to learn this. Always offer a solution. Nothing is worse than delivering a critique and just leaving it at that. We can't do that. We need to clarify and explain the reason for the conversation. And honestly, if somebody comes to you and you feel like they've given you a critique, but you don't understand why it was given or what to do, it's so important to actually go back to that person and ask them, say, I need clarification. I need to understand why you said what you said in the moment or why you did this. And you don't have to be offended or angry in that situation. We're offering a solution, or we're asking for a solution, asking for suggestions for improvement. We're explaining why they need to work on something, or even if we're helping somebody move from one department to the next, or kind of firing them from our ministry, so to speak, we should offer a suggestion that will help them improve in their next job, something that can help them, or offer to show them the next place that they can go. Another key here is to manage our own emotions when we're getting ready to have a conversation. I found at the moment that I just feel the tears getting ready to come, or maybe for you it's anger, or whatever the emotion is that come, we want to have a conversation and keep our tone even, and also keep it professional. And I think it's really important to understand, even in our messaging back and forth to each other, we need to be mindful of our emotions in there, or how somebody might be reading our emotions. We need to not let our emotions dictate our delivery. So if we get emotional, the other person will as well. So it's especially important when the conversation is with somebody that you greatly care for or work closely with. In this situation, we need to take a step back and remove the relationship from the equation. Sometimes it can help us look at things from a fact-based standpoint and focus solely on that. It's a lot easier to be hurt by somebody that you're close to than somebody who's not. So if you have a misunderstanding or have to have a hard conversation, sometimes we have to take the relationship piece out of it and just look at the facts, but then bring that emotion back into it by being empathetic. So that's the next one. We manage our emotions, but we need to be really careful to be empathetic. So as we deliver the message of whatever the hard conversation is, we need to kind of be even keeled. And it doesn't mean that we're not empathetic, but we need to be careful to think about how the other person will feel during the conversation. Allow them to process their emotions. They may not be prepared for the conversation. Sometimes we even need to give them a little bit of a heads up of what's coming, so we can clearly explain why we're having the conversation to help them understand where we're coming from. If they're really taking the news poorly, we need to remind them that this is critique to help make them better, not because they have failed, but actually our hope is to help them succeed. And so, that's so important as leaders, that we should make mistakes. It's the only way that we grow. It's the only way, and we should allow critique in our life. Just because we've made a mistake doesn't mean we've failed. And as your pastor, as your leader, I want to make sure you know that if there's critique on the horizon, or if you've had a hard conversation, it does not equal failure. We don't believe that. There would be a lot longer of a conversation and much more time spent. The one thing we don't want to do is have eggshells that we're walking on. Everybody is trying to be careful not to say this or that to the pastors, or to Johnson and Elena, or to this leader or that leader. We need to be really open and honest about what's going on, but be empathetic about how the other person might process and how to deal with it. So we need to also then allow the other person to ask questions. Questions serve a double purpose. Asking questions helps the other person process what's happened, and it allows you to clarify and solidify details of the conversation. If you aren't sure that the other person has fully comprehended the conversation, ask clarifying questions to check their understanding. Next time you have a difficult conversation, we need to keep these points in mind. And I can give you a checklist of some of these things, but I found this by Judy Ringer. I think it's really powerful. Step-by-step checklist for having difficult conversations. Ask yourself some questions. Prepare and work on yourself before having the tough conversation. What's your purpose for having the conversation? What do you hope to accomplish? What would be an ideal outcome? And watch for hidden purposes on the inside, hidden agendas that we may think we have honorable goals, but executing them sometimes doesn't increase the connection with our team. We notice that our language is excessive or critical or condescending. We need to make sure that we are supporting instead of punishing with our words. And we sometimes think that we're supporting somebody, but they felt punished. And so we have to have open conversations. Hey, that conversation felt really hard and felt tough. So many times we just internalize a hard conversation and we never go back around to it. One of the things our counselor is telling us all the time is it's okay to have conversations that don't get fixed and you don't find the solution to, because life is full of situations that, like a garden, you have to continue to tend, you have to garden, you have to prune, you have to. And so conversations don't need to have a once and done thing. We need to continue to go back around to things. Another thing that we can ask ourselves is, what assumptions are we making about the person's intentions? We may feel intimidated, belittled, ignored, disrespected, or marginalized, and we need to be cautious about assuming that this was that person's intention. Impact does not necessarily equal intent. So how you felt does not actually always equal what they were intending to do. Asking ourselves, what buttons of ours are being pushed? Are we emotional? Are we more emotional than the situation actually warrants? We need to take a look at our own backstory, kind of like they say in the movies, and we need to figure out our own personal history, and is that being triggered? We may still have the conversation, but we need to go into it knowing of the heightened emotional state that we actually bring to the table. I think that's so incredible. I'll try to link you to these notes, but another one is, how's our attitude toward the conversation influencing our perception of it? Some of these things are just so gold. Like, wow, if you think it's going to be a horribly difficult conversation, it probably will be. If we truly believe that whatever happens, some good will come out of it, that likely will actually be the case. So we need to try and adjust our attitude for maximum effectiveness. I love that. Really being careful ahead of time, taking time. For me, it's taking time to pray through the process of the conversation. Really figure out, what's my real motivation in this? Why did this hurt? What's the motivation? What's the situation? Is there a core thing in me beforehand that I need to work on? Who's the other person? We might be thinking about this situation. Are they already aware of the problem? And how do you think they perceive the situation? What are their needs and fears? What solution do you think the other person would suggest? Begin to frame the other person as a partner rather than an opponent. When you've got a hard conversation, we automatically feel like we're in defense mode and they become an opponent rather than a partner. As team leaders, for us together, all of us, we're going to have moments where we have really difficult conversations, and we have to go in on the conversations and not be afraid. Our natural tendency is to not want to have the difficult conversation, or to have a really direct conversation right in the middle of the moment. But it's really, both of those things can be really damaging. So how to have hard conversations. We need to figure out how we've contributed sometimes to the problem and how the other person has contributed to the problem. So here's a couple of ways to have successful outcome. Number one, inquiry. Cultivate an attitude of discovery and curiosity. I love that. Be curious about how the other person might feel or why they're doing this. How about if the person really is from a crazy if they weren't speaking the same language as you, the only way to understand what they were really going through is to watch to watch their body language and listen for unspoken energy. So do that. What does the other person really want? What are they not saying? It's personality sometimes. Sometimes it's not really about you. We need to learn as much as possible in this phase of the conversation to get the right things. We don't need to rush it. So when we go into the conversation, it needs to be about discovery and curiosity of the other person, kind of where they're at. We're asking some questions. Number 2 is acknowledgement, showing that you've heard and understood the situation, and acknowledging the situation. You've heard and understood that there's a problem. Try to understand the other person so well so that you can make their argument even for them. Then do it. Explain back to them what you think is really going on. Guess their hopes and honor their position. This won't change unless they see where you stand. There's no guarantees that they're going to change their position, but acknowledge whatever you can, including your own defensiveness if it comes up. It's fine. It really is. You can decide later how to address it. For example, in an argument with a friend, you can say, I notice I'm becoming defensive, and I think it's because your voice just got louder and sounded angry. And I just want to talk about this topic. I'm not trying to persuade you in either direction. The acknowledgement can help that person to recenter. Acknowledgement can be difficult if we associate it with agreement. We need to keep saying, sounds really important to you. It doesn't mean I'm going to go along with your just by saying that this sounds important to you doesn't mean that you're going to go along with whatever they're saying. So, acknowledging how they feel. The next thing is advocacy. So when we see that our partner or our opponent has expressed all their energy on the topic, it's your turn. What can you see from the perspective that he's missed? Help clarify, and without minimizing their own perspective, we can introduce them to a project, introduce them to long-term situations that maybe they haven't seen. We can advocate for what's not clear. Then we can go into problem solving. We're ready to build team building solutions, brainstorming, figuring out and inquiring what's useful, how to get to a solution on this, ask them what they think might work, find something that you like, build a bridge to the other person, build on what you guys both can come to an agreement on. If the conversation becomes adversarial, go back to inquiry. Asking for the other person's point of view usually creates safety and encourages him to engage. If you've been successful in centering, adjusting your attitude, and engaging with inquiry and useful purpose, building sustainable solutions will be easy. So the last thing we need to be leaving here is to practice. The art of conversation, like with any other art, is something that you practice and acquire skill with ease the more you practice. So a successful outcome depends on you being centered and curious and acknowledging your own emotional energy. Don't take verbal attacks personally. Don't assume what the other person is thinking. Try to see it from their point of view. Practice a conversation with somebody really close to you before having the conversation if it's really hard. I think we can come into these conversations and have really hard conversations, but do it well without breaking relationship. The most important thing is that we have the hard conversation and then we go in on it in a respectful way, because we're going to build. In fact, builders, they actually have to do the hard work. And so here's how we start. Hey, I've got something I'd like to discuss with you that I think would help us, to work together more effectively. Or I'd like to talk about something so-and-so, but first I'd like to get your point of view. Or I need your help with something. Can we talk about XYZ soon? If the other person says, let me get back to you, then follow up with them on it. You can even start with, hey, I think we have different perceptions about this. I'd like to hear how you're thinking about it. I'd like to see if we might reach a better understanding about this. I really want to hear your feelings about this, and I'd love to share my perspective as well. So many times we don't take respectful tone when we get frustrated with something, and I think we can take these tools and really use them with each other. I know we're going to know it now, but it's important because as we respect each other, we can see God doing powerful things. So that's it, and I hope this helps our conversations. I'm working on it really hard, and I hope you'll work on it as well through prayer and diligent practice on this. I believe that we can do something and have the hard conversations so that we can continue to grow this church and grow our teams. Love you guys.